In the book of Numbers, we find a detailed account of the Israelites' journey from Mount Sinai to the Promised Land. This book is filled with numbers, laws, and regulations, but it also reveals God's faithfulness and the consequences of disobedience. Chapter 1 begins with a census of the Israelite men who are able to serve in the army. Each tribe is counted, and their numbers are recorded. This census serves as a reminder of God's promise to make the Israelites a great nation. In Chapter 2, the Israelites are organized into tribes and assigned specific positions around the tabernacle. This arrangement symbolizes order and unity among God's people. Chapter 3 focuses on the Levites, who are set apart to serve in the tabernacle. They are responsible for the care and transportation of the sacred objects. This chapter emphasizes the importance of holiness and the need for consecrated service. Chapter 4 describes the duties of the Kohathites, Gershonites, and Merarites, who are responsible for different aspects of the tabernacle. This chapter highlights the importance of each person's role in the community and the value of teamwork. In Chapter 5, we learn about the laws of purity and restitution. This chapter emphasizes the importance of confession, repentance, and making things right with others. Chapter 6 introduces the Nazirite vow, a voluntary commitment to set oneself apart for God's service. This chapter reminds us of the importance of personal dedication and consecration. Chapter 7 describes the offerings brought by the leaders of each tribe during the consecration of the tabernacle. This chapter highlights the generosity and devotion of the Israelite leaders. Chapter 8 focuses on the consecration of the Levites and their service in the tabernacle. This chapter emphasizes the importance of preparation and dedication in serving God. In Chapter 9, we learn about the celebration of the Passover and the cloud that guided the Israelites' journey. This chapter reminds us of God's faithfulness and guidance in our lives. Chapter 10 describes the use of trumpets to signal various events and gatherings. This chapter emphasizes the importance of communication and unity among God's people. Chapter 11 tells the story of the Israelites' complaints and God's provision of quail and manna. This chapter reminds us of the consequences of discontentment and the need to trust in God's provision. Chapter 12 focuses on the rebellion of Miriam and Aaron against Moses. This chapter highlights the importance of humility and respect for God's chosen leaders. Chapter 13 describes the sending of the 12 spies to explore the Promised Land. This chapter reminds us of the consequences of unbelief and the importance of trusting in God's promises. Chapter 14 tells the story of the Israelites' rebellion and their punishment of wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. This chapter emphasizes the consequences of disobedience and the need for faith and obedience. Chapter 15 focuses on various laws and regulations, including offerings, Sabbath observance, and the wearing of tassels. This chapter highlights the importance of obedience and reverence for God's commands. Chapter 16 tells the story of Korah's rebellion against Moses and Aaron. This chapter reminds us of the consequences of pride and the importance of respecting God's appointed leaders. Chapter 17 describes the budding of Aaron's staff as a sign of his authority. This chapter emphasizes the importance of God's chosen leaders and the need for unity among God's people. Chapter 18 focuses on the responsibilities and privileges of the priests and Levites. This chapter highlights the importance of honoring God and supporting those who serve Him. Chapter 19 describes the laws of purification and the use of the ashes of a red heifer. This chapter reminds us of the need for cleansing and the consequences of defilement. Chapter 20 tells the story of Moses striking the rock to bring forth water. This chapter emphasizes the consequences of disobedience and the importance of trusting in God's instructions. Chapter 21 describes the Israelites' journey around Edom and their encounters with various nations. This chapter reminds us of God's protection and provision in our lives. Chapter 22 focuses on the story of Balaam and his attempts to curse the Israelites. This chapter highlights the importance of God's sovereignty and the consequences of seeking to harm His people. Chapter 23 tells the story of Balaam's blessings upon the Israelites. This chapter emphasizes God's faithfulness and the power of His blessings. Chapter 24 describes Balaam's final blessings and prophecies. This chapter reminds us of God's plans and purposes for His people. Chapter 25 focuses on the Israelites' idolatry and the consequences of their actions. This chapter highlights the importance of faithfulness and the dangers of compromise. Chapter 26 describes another census of the Israelites before they enter the Promised Land. This chapter emphasizes the fulfillment of God's promise to make the Israelites a great nation. Chapter 27 tells the story of the daughters of Zelophehad and their inheritance rights. This chapter highlights the importance of justice and equality among God's people. Chapter 28 focuses on the offerings and sacrifices to be made at specific times. This chapter emphasizes the importance of worship and obedience in our relationship with God. Chapter 29 describes the various festivals and celebrations to be observed throughout the year. This chapter reminds us of the importance of remembering and celebrating God's faithfulness. Chapter 30 focuses on vows and oaths made by individuals. This chapter highlights the importance of keeping our commitments and honoring our words. Chapter 31 tells the story of the Israelites' victory over the Midianites. This chapter emphasizes the consequences of sin and the importance of obedience to God's commands. Chapter 32 describes the request of the tribes of Reuben and Gad to settle on the east side of the Jordan River. This chapter reminds us of the importance of unity and commitment to God's purposes. Chapter 33 provides a summary of the Israelites' journey from Egypt to the plains of Moab. This chapter emphasizes the faithfulness and guidance of God throughout their journey. Chapter 34 describes the boundaries of the Promised Land. This chapter highlights the fulfillment of God's promise to give the Israelites a land of their own. Chapter 35 focuses on the cities of refuge and the importance of justice and mercy. This chapter reminds us of the need for compassion and the consequences of injustice. Chapter 36 tells the story of the daughters of Zelophehad and their inheritance rights. This chapter emphasizes the importance of preserving the inheritance within the tribe. In conclusion, the book of Numbers reveals God's faithfulness, the consequences of disobedience, and the importance of trust and obedience in our relationship with Him. It reminds us of God's plans and purposes for His people and the need for unity and commitment to His commands. May we learn from the lessons of the book of Numbers and seek to walk in faith and obedience in our own lives.